I've made some videos about save objects in the past, and there always seems to be a certain struggle with dealing with and understanding what save objects are and how they work and what they do. So I want to talk about how you can learn to understand these objects a little bit better. So a save object in its most basic form is just an object like anything else you can make in the engine. It's actors or pawns or characters, components, assets. Everything in the end is an object. Everything you see inherits off of this object class, which is just something empty where you can put your code, put your values, and so on and so forth. So if we make a save game here, let's call that BP tutorial save. Usually what you end up doing with a save object is not really having much in the way of like functions on it, because save objects function as mostly just a container for a bunch of data. So let's say this bool for boss fight beaten or whatever. And then we also have like the player's level. Let's make that an integer. And then we have the player's HP, which would be a float. And you can add in a bunch of stuff here, everything that you need to save, like your current location for the player when you save, and the rotation or whatever. Maybe just save the transform, actually. This list of values can become fairly big fairly quickly as your game grows, and that is okay, because all of this information needs to be saved. But how does a save object differ from just making a normal object and keeping track of all these values? And that is where we come down to the difference between an object that exists in memory and an object that exists on your disk. Any game, well actually any program really, that you're running on your computer is using up a certain amount of memory on your computer. And every object that exists within the program exists within that like blob of memory. So when we go in, and in some blueprint in our game, we make a save function. What we're doing is we create a save game object, right? And we'll make that our tutorial save. This makes an object of that type with all the slots for that data in memory on your computer. So it makes it as part of the game, meaning that when the game gets closed and all the memory that the game used up, that gets wiped, that gets cleaned up for a new program to be able to use, everything that we have in this object that we created here is going to get wiped. So what we want to do is all the data that's in this object, we want to take it out of memory and put it onto a disk, whether that be a hard drive, an SSD, whatever. Because that is outside of the scope of the game's memory. That is a place on your, again, let's say hard drive, that's supposed to be used as long-term storage. This create save game object, though, doesn't interact with your storage at all. This entirely works within memory. And that is important to understand, because generally what is a nice way of keeping track of a lot of data throughout your game is creating one of these save game objects in a easy to access place. So instead of doing this within the player, what we might do is we might do it within, for instance, the game mode, or even the game instance. So we would put it in here and then create variable so that it has a variable for that as well here. And we'll name this live save object. Now we have a reference to that existing object in memory throughout our entire playthrough, our entire game, as long as this game mode doesn't get reset, and it gets reset when we load into a new map, for instance. Which is where putting it in the game instance is even more secure, because that exists for the entirety of your gameplay from the moment you start it up to the moment you close the game down. And anytime we want to update that save file, we can just update the version of it in memory, which is fast and not that bad to do like super often either. The issue comes in where if you constantly are updating things to disk, because that is a fairly slow operation comparatively. So with this live save objects, we could, for instance, set the location, which is actually a full transform, anytime throughout anything with just like a custom event. Set saved location. And then we don't need to save everything about the game all at once. All we need to do is whenever we want to update our newly like most recent saved location, what we do is we just give that in like this. And that then updates the version of it that exists in memory. Only when we actually want to commit this to a slot on disk, which might happen whenever you like change level screens, or maybe even only when you close the game as a whole, do we then take this save game object and we save game to slot. This is the node that takes our object in memory with all of its values and writes it to a file on your hard drive. Hey, if you're enjoying this content and it's helping you out, please don't forget to leave a like on this video. You can also leave a comment on this video expressing what you liked or asking questions that I can cover in future videos. And then of course, if you want to stay up to date with those new uploads, make sure that you're subscribed to the channel as well. So you give that a name, that's going to be the actual name of the file as well. So we can just call that save game. Of course, that can be a variable or whatever. And what we create here is a system in which we can constantly update this live save object with the most up-to-date information without really worrying about it taking a long time to write that down into a new file every single time. And instead of whenever we save the game, writing a bunch of files all to one save object, as you might see in a lot of projects, even my own game project has a gigantic save and load function where it takes a bunch of data at that point in time instead of gradually updating a live save object as the game plays along. That gets kind of difficult and annoying to manage. But if you do it this way with a bunch of smaller functions that can individually be called to just update the most recent reflection of this in memory, then all you need to do is whenever you want to actually save this to your disk, save a game to slot. This is the only node at that point you need. Because you're not at that point gathering up a bunch of data from all over the place to write into a save file. You're just taking a snapshot of the current data that you have in your memory version of the object and just writing that to the file. And similarly, we can of course then load game from a slot, which you can do asynchronously as well if you want to. You give in a slot name, and that just gives out a save game object, which this is going to give you a generic save game object. So you need to know what type of save you're loading and then cast to that. So cast to our BP tutorial save. And after we've loaded that, we can even make that our new live save game object. It will discard the one that was in there before, and we can continue on with this one. So here it is just quite relevant to understand the difference for save objects between what an object is in memory and what an object is on disk. And especially as your game grows and you create more and more and more data that needs to be saved, keeping a live save object around in memory for easy access to just constantly update is going to be so much smoother to work with and expand than having a giant entire blueprint graph just for saving a bunch of data. Especially since some of the data that you might want to save mightn't even be around anymore by the time you get to like a save point or whatever. Let's say that you have an entire level within your game that doesn't have any save points, but you do want to save the state of some of the things inside of that level. If you only save data whenever you tell the game to start saving data, in like a save point or whatever, it can only write any data that at that point actually exists. If you want to save data about actors that have maybe been destroyed that you want to keep track of. If the actors already are destroyed, they're not in memory, you have no references to them anymore, there's no way to save that anymore. If instead you have this live object, you can just, whenever you destroy an enemy, add it with like some kind of unique identifier to a list of destroyed enemies. And a very big thank you to all my Patreons. You can see them on screen right now. If you want to help support the channel or get any of the project files in any of my tutorials, there's a link down below to the Patreon page to support me, or alternatively as a YouTube member. My Cave Student tier supporters, Oiku, Earl, Monseville Urno, and my Cave Digger tier supporters, Mauricio Farias.